Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report on June 12th, 1987. Speaking in West Berlin, President Ronald Reagan said, General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate, Mr. Gorbachev. Open this gate, Mr. Gorbachev. Tear down this wall. So dramatic. And so, history ended. The Soviet era of collectivization and scarcity was over. A new magical era of ever-rising prosperity was all our futures. Stacey.
Yes, notice the word that President Reagan used was liberalization. So after 30 years, 40 years of unimpeded liberalization all over the world, we have this headline: tiny and 1,100 pounds a month, corporate answer to flat sharing in London. The Collective, a new 550-bed tower in Old Oak, billed as a new way to live in London, is the corporate answer to the dilemma facing new workers in the capital hunting for a flat and someone to share the costs. It claims to give tenants the first move in on Monday, a hassle-free collective life similar to student halls of residence, but for people starting out in their career. So it's a 550-bed tower. There's a collective kitchens and bathrooms and living rooms and social areas, and the actual bedrooms are 10 square meters, very tiny, and it's all positive spin. But I want to turn to this propaganda poster from the Soviet Union. There's a website that was like mocking all these propaganda posters throughout history from all over the world, but here's a Soviet one that reminds me of this story. They're mocking this Soviet propaganda poster, building a better tomorrow.
Yeah.
And the message, the Soviet Union is building a better tomorrow, and we've got the modest one-bedroom apartment to prove it. So
Yep.
Here we have collectivization, as many in the Soviet Union did live in very similar sort of setups, shared living rooms and communal sort of spaces and their own little, bedrooms.
Yeah, it has to be. It's a Sovietization of Britain, essentially, and the collectivization is becoming the new dominant political theme as the economy continues to shrink and continue to favor kleptocrats at the top. And you have here in the UK an economy that's not competitive whatsoever. Competition is constantly killed by the entrenched oligopolists. And starting a business here is very, very difficult unless you're servicing the clownocracy at the top. The fintech industry started off with noble ambitions in the blockchain space. Then suddenly it's a funnel feeding into Blythe Masters, who's a known entity in this horrid kind of paradigm of collectivization ruled by kleptocrats. And so, yes, people are being forced to live in ever smaller spaces. They're charged a lot of money.
But
of course, the banks will lend them money to be in those spaces.
Yeah.
They'll lend them a lot of money to go to school. The amount of debt that these UK graduates end up with when they graduate has never been higher. It's the highest in the world. That's part of the collectivization, Sovietization of the British economy. All dissent is outlawed. Anybody says anything in the opposing benches, Labour, for example, they're immediately called by the sitting prime minister a terrorist. That's a Sovietization of the UK. Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, they're like living large. They're expanding. They're smoking cigars. They're having a good time. In the UK, it's becoming a backwater.
The former Soviet Union. Now, I want to remind people, because many in our audience might not have even been born then, but back in the 80s, we used to laugh. In America, we used to laugh and think about people in collectivization or lining up for food, standing in lines for hours for food. Now we have food banks all over the UK where people have to line up for hours in order to get food and go back to their little 10 square meter collective living. Now this is the first of these buildings. They're building, this is way out in Willesden Junction over a train station. It's 550 rooms. It was financed by a rich Singaporean family. And they're building another one in East London, way out on the edge. But I want to turn to another propaganda poster because, they have the same sort of like heroic, sort of patriotic, sort of positive to these. First, I'm going to read a quote from the actual guy who's built this. So he is Reza Merchant, and he is a graduate of London School of Economics. So here we have, remember, these are economic ideologies allegedly that were competing back in the Cold War. And I think it's no coincidence that we're back in Cold War 2.0 just as we start living collectively like this. But he says, our Old Oak development is offering Londoners a fresh and innovative way of living. It's also a much needed option in the context of the capital's housing crisis. We are changing the way people can choose to live. We're offering a solution that will enable young working Londoners who are the lifeblood of the UK economy to live properly, enjoy themselves, and meet like-minded people. Co-living creates a genuine sense of community alongside access to so many more amenities that you would get in a flat share. And now here is the ground manager, the guy who's actually managing the site, and he talks about, the downfalls of one of the problems of collective living is that, of course, who cleans up in the kitchen and all that stuff. Well, he says all residents will have to become used to living communally and be expected to clean up the kitchens after use. Ultimately, those who repeatedly fail to do so would be ejected, but only after every other avenue has explored. So I'm going to turn to some North Korean propaganda poster. I think this is quite new. And as you see, this housewife admonishing you, turn off the water, don't let it drip. So maybe they could hang this in this collective space, that this commune that people are living on in way over in West London.
Well, where is this going? Okay, the next step after this will be everyone has to wear the same uniform, like Mao's China or in other dictatorships from before. They have to wear the same uniform. Then, because it'll become living conditions.
Well, they already do. They wear a beard.
Yeah, well, the living conditions will be so horrid, they'll start putting bars on the windows and locks on the door. Of course, that'll be the next step. And then, it's a slippery slope, isn't it? And, until you have a problem of how do you keep these humans, alive at the cheapest possible way. Then slave labor will be introduced to do some kind of slave issue to compete with Chinese slave labor. This is where this is all going.
Well, it doesn't. So at the time, again, bringing it back to the 80s, and a lot of people won't remember it, what we were told is total free market capitalism on our terms, how America does it, and it was actually just all fraud and rentier. So, we don't want to be like the commies, the socialists, and all that stuff, because then if we had that, we'd have to live in a collective commune sort of situation. We'd have to wait in food bank lines. And lo and behold, we have that. So what have we done that is Soviet-like? The command and control, we have command and control monetary policy, we have command and control military policy. Everything is very similar to what
the Soviets had the idea that the authoritarianism was unlimited. It didn't work. In the post-Reagan era, the idea is that fiat money is unlimited. That you can print fiat money by the trillions, and it has no consequences.
Yes.
It's unlimited resource.
Yes.
And they both led to the same outcome: prison for the population.
Exactly.
Prison.
Imprisoned, and we're imprisoned by debt, and they call it choice. So when people look at this, they say, well, the Soviet Union, you were forced to do this. Here, you have the choice. I remember the guy who's running this development over in Wilson Junction, he's saying, this is a choice. You have a choice. It's a better choice than living in a dodgy flat share. So here, let's look at some analysis in The Guardian that was done about this story called The Collective, the building called The Collective. Collective living's fine for students, but for everybody else, it stinks. And this person notes that, but perhaps the most rage-inducing thing about the collective is it will probably work. Yes, it's replacing independent living with an ongoing studenthood, a sort of permalescence. Yes, it's another sign that neither government nor market are going to take any of the radical steps required to actually address the housing crisis or improve the lot of renters, and that both state and private sector are content to offer the next generation a few crumbs for the table. So, but we, the population, have also accepted it. It's just our lot in life, and this is how it is. And a lot of people in communist nations, in North Korea or the Soviet Union or the former communist nations, said this is just our lot in life, until one day they took down that wall. They tore down the wall. And the wall now is debt.
Anyone who objects is labeled a dissenter, and they're punished severely. And you see it right here in the UK.
Or they're cut off from the credit grid, because remember, that's the wall. That's the wall that controls you, is debt, access to credit.
Right. You're off the grid. Now you're homeless. You're living in the street. And so living in a collective prison is a step up from being homeless and being beat up every night and abused and tortured. You want to be a part of the collective, and that's what they do. They all dissent. It's not that people voluntarily join this collective in the UK. It's that anyone who resists is labeled a dissenter by the state-owned, state-run, state-editorialized media outlets, and then they're cast out.
So let's look back at the U.S., where Ronald Reagan was president, and here we have the collective in the UK. And in the the United States, the U.S. homeownership rate falls again, nearing a 48-year low. The drop dashes hopes it had hit bottom, but economists say the stabilization is still good news. Remember, it has to be patriotic. This is positive news.
What was the first
disaster.
part? The 40?
So the U.S. home ownership rate hits 48-year low.
Right.
63.5% is the new home ownership rate, down from 63.8% last quarter. So this is the lowest since 1968, before Reagan was even president.
Look, there's a transition that no one's talking about. The way the economy is calculated now, it used to be per household. You say that a certain number of households, and because households, you had the marriage, which is a GDP event. You had the kids, which is a GDP event. You furnished your house. You bought your house.
Household formation.
Household formation. That's the way economy kind of is modeled for 50, 60, 70 years. But that's gone now. The new model for the home are these things, okay? The whole economy is based on mobile phones and interacting with your mobile phone. So if you pack thousands of people into a prison cell, but give them a mobile phone, they can still go on Facebook. Facebook stock will still go higher, just because people are on prison doesn't mean Facebook stock's not going to go higher.
Let's look at the actual propaganda that they're pushing, what the positive news is out of this. So they say the continued declines in the home ownership rate in part reflect a growing number of renter households. Some 363,000 new renter households were formed in the first quarter compared with the same last year. About twice as many as 177,000 new owner households. So that's a household formation. And remember, I said that debt credit is that wall that must be torn down. Well, they say still it also appears that factors such as rising home prices, student loans, delays in marriage and childbearing, and uncertainty about buying a home as an investment are weighing on younger households and motivating them to rent instead.
Look, you could have people on death row going down the green line, ready to be gassed to death, and they would still be making updates on their Facebook page. Okay, that's the economy. There's 1 billion people a day making updates on their Facebook page. That's the unit of economic metric that needs to be considered when analyzing global economy, not household formation. Nobody's voluntarily forming a household anymore. It's too freaking expensive.
They're living collectively. They're living with their parents. They're living in their parents' basement. They're living in their grandparents' attic. They're living anywhere.
They can update their Facebook. The UK state is buggering me. Oh, I got to update my Facebook page. Woo!